Hey, what's going on, everyone? Thank you for coming to watch. We've got you guys an update on a major storm system that is currently moving through the central United States, and this storm could bring a tornado outbreak, but also a blizzard to many portions across the central and eastern United States. I've got all the details coming right up. All right, so thank you all for joining me here on this Sunday afternoon. We've got a lot to talk about in this video. We're going to be going into the details of this major storm system that we've got going on. You can see it on your radar, dumping many inches of snow over portions of the upper Midwest and as well as portions of the upper Great Plains. I also have a guest on the show. Here's Davis Does Weather. He is a great guy. He does
Hello.
he does weather forecasts on his channel, so I'll pin his channel link and I'll put his channel link in the description. But yeah, you guys should definitely check out to him and consider subscribing to his channel. But yeah, I'm just gonna have him on the show today. We're gonna talk about what needs to be talked about because we do have a lot of dangerous storms that are going to be entering or impacting the United States. All right, so starting out with your current radar, you can see we've got a very big storm system. This is a classic, late March storm system. We've got our nice low pressure signature right there with a negatively tilted trough. And we do actually have an enhanced risk for severe weather, which is driven by a big time hail threat. And you can see these storm systems, these thunderstorms that are raging across the central United States. Well, those are the ones that are driving this enhanced risk and the slight risk. So that's what we need to worry about. And then also up into the Dakotas, Minnesota, and then all the way up into Wisconsin as well. We have a lot of very heavy snow that's falling right now. Some people could expect over 2 feet of snow, which is pretty crazy because it is late March. And when was the last time we had a blizzard in late March? It's pretty crazy. All right, so let's get rocking and rolling here. We'll take a look at your alerts. And you can see we're very active, especially in the central United States, where you can see in the Texas here in the Gold Shade. That's where we have high wind warnings. That's where we also have the dry conditions. So if you put those two things together, you're going to get a increased fire danger. And you can see we do have red flag warnings in this pink shade. Wind advisories going up through central Texas into Oklahoma, into eastern Kansas, and then portions of Missouri. This goes down through Arkansas, portions of eastern Louisiana, all of Mississippi, and portions of Alabama into northwestern Georgia, central and western Tennessee. We're also in this dark brown shade. We have the high wind watches. All right, this is where things get a little crazy. We go up into the north central United States, the high plains. In this orange shade, we do have blizzard warnings. And Davis, what do you think about these blizzard warnings being out? Not only that the NAM has been really just pushing it with those snow totals, but the fact that the National Weather Service is basically agreeing on the fact that we will see these pretty ridiculous totals.
So I think one of the things that is important to note is that this is the late March time frame, and considering the fact that we have all these blizzard warnings here, right? You may notice today in your area that even if you're under a blizzard warning, there will be a severe weather threat for you as well. But there are going to be some gusty to damaging winds for these blizzard warning areas here, right? We could
Yeah.
have some areas get as high as 60 to 70 mile per hour gusts at times, which I think is honestly going to be an even bigger problem than just the snow itself, because the snow totals itself, they are going to be relatively high, but it's nothing insane. But those gusty to damaging winds are going to cause a huge problem for
Yeah.
blowing snow and blizzard conditions.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, it's pretty crazy how close the blizzard warnings are to areas that will be in the severe threat. And I do believe that there are a few counties out here in the northwestern Kansas that are they might even actually be inside of the slight risk. So that's pretty interesting to see. But up into the Dakotas, into Minnesota, Wisconsin, here in eastern Montana in the pink shade, you've got your winter storm warning. Still, you're not going to see as intense conditions as those people in the blizzard warnings, but you're still going to end up with about 6 to 12, maybe even a little bit more than that for snow totals. And those winds might not be as strong, so you might not get blizzard conditions for, an extended period of time. But that doesn't mean you're not going to see blizzard conditions at all. You still probably will end up with blizzard conditions for maybe half an hour or so. It's just, the overall impacts are not going to be as intense as folks out here into central Nebraska, southern and South Dakota, and then into Kansas. All right, and you can see we also do have red flag warnings going out for central Missouri. And over to North Carolina, you have freeze warnings in this dark blue or dark purple shade, and then in the light blue shade, you have freeze watches. All right, so let's get going here. We're taking a look at the south central United States, the NAM 3 kilometer model. We're looking at these big storms that are going to be moving through, but the tricky thing is that there is absolutely no cape that we're going to be dealing with. So it's really more of the dynamics rather than kind of the moisture and instability. We got to talk about changing heights, wind shear, and and just very strong low level jet energy. All right, so let's get this going here, and this is what the story was about 1 p.m. today. We had a lot of convection going on right around the south central Oklahoma, north central Texas border. All right, but these storms have really popped off in the last just last few minutes, and as we get into the later hours of today, the peak heating time of today, these storms are going to be just downright explosive. And the reason why this is such a high tornado threat is because there's a lot of changing direction in those heights with those wind speeds, and so therefore you get shear. And when you get shear, you get that rotation. And then I'm telling you guys, if we look at a photograph when these storms are well underway, they're going to be pretty intense. And we're also going to look at the SPC, and the SPC is going to look very concerning, agreeing with what the NAM is about to show. So Davis, what's your take on these storms so far? Just before we really get into the prime time explosive period for these storms.
So I think that I'm actually agreeing with you. I think that aside from the lackluster Cape, there are some really good conditions here for tornadic potential. And, even that large hail threat is going to be a major problem for portions of Oklahoma and Kansas, maybe even down into Texas now, as some models have recently been hinting that some storms may fire into Texas with large hails and a minor tornadic potential. But I mean, again, that zero cape is going to make it a little bit trickier for these storms to become quite as active as some of these storm chasers might want. I still think it's going to be very eventful no matter what, though.
Yeah, I agree with you that the storms may have a little bit. I think that the storms may have a little bit of a problem continuing on. There will be some cape. There will be some moisture. I believe. We'll look at dew points here. And we'll just look at how high these dew points will be, but I do think that it's definitely going to be because of the dynamics rather than thermodynamics. But you can see we have plenty of moist air rising up at least into Texas, but people farther north you can see are only in the 40s and 50s for dew points. So it's pretty crazy that you have an enhanced risk for severe weather, yet in these areas you're only getting up to about 50 degrees as far as your dew points go, and the only 60 degree plus dew points are all the way down into Texas, where we don't really have that big of a severe weather threat. So that really shows you that it's about the dynamics rather than the thermodynamics. So here you go. We're getting into 8 p.m. tonight, and look at these storms. All right, you can see that you have some supercells that are starting to form, and all these showers and thunderstorms that are starting to slowly but surely form out here into eastern Texas and Oklahoma. Those are actually supercells that are waiting to be born. It's almost like a time, like a bomb that's ticking. Once that bomb explodes, these storms are just going to unleash power, and we're really going to see that tornado threat become elevated. But you can see that we don't really have much. I mean, we have some convection going on in northern Texas, but the main action is up here into northern Oklahoma, into southern Kansas, where we do have, I wouldn't say discrete storms, but definitely storm supercells that would definitely be rotating, but also big hail. I think big hail is going to be a big deal with this system, and I do think that a lot of these storms are going to be dropping hail that could be over 2 inches in diameter, kind of similar to our last severe weather outbreak, where I believe we did have a 5.25 inch hailstone fall in it might have been Kansas, I'm not sure, but people were talking about softball size hail, which is absolutely insane. I don't think we're going to see that big of that big hail, but I do think still we're going to get pretty decent hail sizes as our reports come out of these areas. But getting into the rest of tonight into tomorrow morning, you can see that we start to see this line of storms forming over eastern Texas and then into southeastern Oklahoma. This is going to be definitely a damage windgust line, quasi convective system. Not sure how you say that. I forgot. But anyways, you got a damaged wind gust line, a squall line that's producing thunderstorms sweeping across Texas and then up into eastern Oklahoma. Now, these storms up into eastern Oklahoma aren't as defined inside of this line, so I think some of these storms may still be rotating into Oklahoma. But by early tomorrow morning, the tornado threat, I believe, would be dying down. But once these showers continue to push off to the east into those more moist areas, I think that's where we're going to see the tornado threat kind of rebound. And so just recapping, what we just saw for the day one for today on the NAM, what do you think? What do you agree with as far as what the NAM is showing for today, Davis?
So I think that we're for sure going to see some isolated cells towards the beginning of the event, and then I do think that we will see a linear threat develop. But I'm not too sold on the fact that it's going to go all the way back up into southwestern Missouri. It very well could. I
Yeah,
think the more intense action is going to be in that southeast Oklahoma, kind of east Texas corridor
yes,
there as it
definitely.
sweeps into portions of Louisiana and Arkansas. Anybody that's not aware, linear lines of storms are usually damaging wind makers, all right? They do have a tornado threat with them usually. They do have a large hail threat with them usually. But the main thing is likely going to be the damaging winds that are going to be impactful from this line of storms here that's going to be sweeping through East Texas, Eastern Oklahoma, Western Arkansas, and then also Western Louisiana. But I think no matter what happens, even if we see a very unexpected low end from this severe weather event, I think one or two tornadoes is still probably going to pop up from this line here.
Yeah, exactly. And the SPC is really going to say it all. But what we're looking at here is just what the models are showing. We'll compare that to kind of what the SPC is showing, and maybe if the SPC kind of reflects what the NAM is showing here. So getting into tomorrow, now this is when things get interesting. You can see this line is starting to break apart. Now, if you didn't have these showers in front of this line of storms, you probably would not have nearly as high as a tornado threat than without these showers. But you do have these showers, which is going to serve as prefrontal supercells once these storms finally get that heat and just the instability. And there are some decent dew points out here, but it's once again it's not going to be to 100% because of the dew points and the cape levels. But this is getting into 2 p.m. tomorrow, and this line of storms is still breaking apart. So now these little like dots, these red dots, those are supercells. Those will be rotating, and I think that this is really going to drive a big time tornado threat. But yeah, the NAM is really pushing the severe threat farther north. We can see all the way up to like the St. Louis area. You're still getting storms, which is pretty interesting. That we have like zero cape up in this area, but the NAM still wants some sort of severe threat to be pushed farther north. But I'm I'm looking at these storms, and these are monstrous supercells raging across western Arkansas, western Louisiana. I would definitely watch out for those. That might be a highlighted area for that tornado threat. And my goodness, look at this line of damage and wind gusts. I mean, you still got these supercells on the backside. You still will have supercells on the front side. This is looking at like a significant event, to be honest. And you can even see storms as far north as central Illinois, which is kind of bizarre because once again, there is like no cape out there. You got some storms back towards that low pressure out into Kansas. So a very widespread severe threat is what the NAM is showing. I'm getting into like the dinner time frame for tomorrow, and this line of storms continues to charge through. And my goodness, gosh, look at these storms! Look at these supercells that will be forming right in front of this line. Big time hail, big time damaging wind gusts written all over it, all the way up from Louisiana, or all the way down from Louisiana, all the way up through Missouri. All right, so a very far north severe threat is looking possible with the NAM. But this will definitely be an overnight severe threat for those of you that are living in the Dixie Alley. So please make sure that you have a good way, a simple way to receive weather alerts. Make sure that um, if you have a weather radar, please make sure that is on. Because if you're going to bed and you're like asleep, but there's a tornado warning, I know it's going to wake you up, and I know it's annoying, but you want that radio to be blaring to wake you up, because you do not want to be caught in these situations where we may have a very, these supercells will be very strong, but we may end up with a very strong tornado, and you definitely don't want to be caught off guard. Also, because it's at night. All right, so you just want to make sure that you are staying weather aware all the way through the day into the overnight hours. But this line continues and it finally starts to break apart, at least for the northern part of it, but still a very strong line of damaging wind gusts, a quasi-linear convective system still moving across uh, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee. And this is still by 3 a.m. on what is this? This is Tuesday. All right, so this is like a 3 day severe weather event, and then this finally moves out, and we get cold air, more stable air to move in. So that was a very active run of the Nam. I think that I think that was a pretty good run, except for the just for all the severe threat farther north. But Davis, what do you think?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on that. Again, I am very much sold on the fact that we're gonna get some supercells down there in Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas. Obviously, that's basically guaranteed at this point. But it gets a bit more questionable once you travel into places like Missouri, and then once you go to places like central Illinois and central Indiana, where even the NAM is showing some maybe supercellular activity popping up. I just don't buy it.
Yeah,
There's no cape. The dew points aren't high enough. There's not enough going on to really produce that much of a severe threat as the NAM is painting.
yeah.
But other than that, I agree with the NAM on pretty much everything we've seen this run.
Yeah, I mean, we've been repeating all over and over again that it's not just based off the dew points and the thermodynamics, but I mean, you can't have nothing when it comes to Cape and thermodynamics. You can't just completely rely on those aerodynamics. It's just yeah, I mean, you can't really have that severe threat that far north. And I'm not buying it as well. Up into central Indiana, central Illinois, maybe as far south as maybe even central Missouri. I just think this is going to be more of a southern focused severe threat rather than way up north into the lower Midwest. But yeah, let's move on here to your SPC outlook, and this is when things get really scary. All right, so this is our day one outlook. We just got upgraded from a slight risk to an enhanced risk, a level 3 to 5 risk for severe weather. This is including north central Oklahoma going up towards south central Kansas. This crosses the border. This includes a pretty low populated area of only 122,000 people, but this includes Woodward, Oklahoma, Weatherford, Oklahoma, and Clinton, Oklahoma, all in that enhanced risk, which is in that orange area. Now, the surrounding areas of that, you're still in a slight risk, which is still going to be highlighted for those areas that will still most likely see severe storms, but you just don't have as big of a chance. But that's including areas from north central Texas up through Oklahoma and then all the way up to northwestern Kansas. All right, I think I might have said north central Kansas earlier, but I meant north central Texas. But that's in that yellow 2 out of 3, or sorry, 2 out of 5 risk, including Dallas, Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, Oklahoma City, Arlington, Texas, and Wichita, Kansas. All right, that's a pretty big populated area of just under 8 million people, but not as big as the marginal risk, level 1 out of 5 risk, including a total population of over 8 million people. All right, so here is your tornado threat for today. All right, we're up to a 5%, which is considered slightly elevated. That includes Enid, Oklahoma, Dodge City, Kansas, Yukon, Oklahoma, Chicksaw, I don't know how to pronounce that in Oklahoma, and El Reno, Oklahoma. But that's in that red 5% risk. That's where you do have I would consider it a decent threat for tornadoes, but definitely just an area to just to be concerned because there will be rotating supercells that could end up dropping a tornado, and I wouldn't you know I would be surprised if we saw like violent tornadoes in this area, but still I would not be surprised if we had a few like EF1 to EF2 tornadoes somewhere inside the general area. Certain areas of that you are in a 2% tornado threat in that green shade. That's including north central Texas all the way up through northwestern Kansas. That's in that green shade. That's including Dallas, Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Arlington, Texas. Your damaging wind gust threat to 15. I would consider that pretty much. I wouldn't consider it high, but definitely elevated as well. Kind of like the tornado threat, going all the way up from north central Texas through south central Kansas in that yellow shade. Surrounding areas of that, you are in the 5%. In the brownish red shade. And then here's probably your main threat of today. It's your damaging hail threat. You're up to a 30% chance for seeing damaging hail. That's including areas really to the to the east of the panhandle of Oklahoma up towards south central Kansas. That's in the red shade. You got 30% risk. Surrounding areas of that, you're in the 15% risk. And then in the brown shade, you have a 5% risk for seeing damaging hail, which is 1 inch in diameter or larger within 25 miles of a point. All right, so do you have anything to say about this SPC outlook today, Davis?
Yeah, so I think at the 0-100 outlook, I would not rule out the 30% hail risk getting moved a little bit further to the south. I also would
Yeah.
not rule out a hatch risk getting issued. A hatch risk for hail means that that is going to be a 2 inch hail threat or larger if you're in that hatched area. And, at the minute, we don't have that, but it would not shock me at all if that was issued. I think that the hail threat in areas like southern Nebraska may be a little bit lower than what the SPC is painting. I don't think there's really any major hail threat for there. But other than that, I think the SPC is pretty much spot on with this day one outlook here.
Yeah, I like this outlook as well, keeping it far enough south, and it is including some of Texas, which there is. Keep in mind that there are some decent dew points there. There is some Cape out there, so I also do really like this SPC outlook. But this is when things get a little serious. Take a look at that. All right, you have. I know it's an enhanced risk again, and that's kind of the same as today, but it's a little bit bigger. But the tornado threat is what's really concerning. So we'll start with the overall threat for severe weather up to an enhanced level 3 to 5 risk for tomorrow, including the three states corner of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Arkansas. All right, and you're including some pretty populated areas, including Jackson, Mississippi, Monroe, Louisiana, Alexandria, Louisiana, Greenville, Mississippi, and Vicksburg, Mississippi. That's in that enhanced level 3 to 5 risk. Surrounding areas of that, you're in the slight risk, extending for more areas in the Dixie Alley. That's including a total population of just over 7 million people. That's including New Orleans, Louisiana, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Shreveport, Louisiana, Mobile, Alabama, and Metairie, Louisiana. So some pretty big areas, some pretty populated areas there. But it's really the enhanced risk that's concerning. But also, you have a secondary marginal risk that's going up for actually areas of northwestern Missouri up into western Iowa. And if you go back into the video to when we were looking at the NAM 3-kilometer model, there were a cluster of some storm cells that were trying to fire across this region. Definitely nothing that's too crazy, but that is some agreement on the NAM that's kind of showing here on the SPC, but definitely not a very high threat for severe storms up there. It's really going to be farther south with this entire event. It just coming through, but this is your tornado threat, and yeah, it's pretty concerning. You got a 10% hatch risk for severe weather, which means you have a 10% or greater probability of a EF2 to EF5 tornado within 25 miles of a point. A hatch 10% risk for tornadoes usually means that there is going to be a significant event for severe weather that will be mainly including tornadoes. And I don't want to call it an outbreak because we don't know that yet. We don't know if this is going to be like a bust or if it's going to be a overachiever for this event. But a 10% hatch risk for tornadoes could also mean that there could be a tornado outbreak, and that's what we want to avoid. But the fact that we do have that means that we just got to make sure that we're getting all this potentially life-saving information out to some people, because look at this. In the significant severe hatch risk, you got Jackson, Mississippi, Alexandria, Louisiana, Vicksburg, Mississippi, Clinton, Mississippi, and Pearl, Mississippi. Those are very populated and major cities out in this risk. So I think that this is very concerning. What do you think, Davis?
Yeah, so I think that the 10% hatch risk is definitely warranted. I don't know, actually. I mean, the 10% risk I think is for sure warranted. I think the hatch risk is a good idea. It would not shock me if we didn't see any EF2 to EF5 tornadoes from this event. But it is definitely a possibility that's there, all right, especially for areas of, like, eastern Louisiana. I wouldn't even be surprised if that 10% risk grows any.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that the 2% risk would probably end up getting a little bit bigger if the models like the NAM are correct. Then these storms are going to be firing up way further than central Arkansas, which is all the 2% risk goes out to. So expect potential upgrades to this risk. At the minute, again, we can't really call it a tornado or a severe weather outbreak yet because it hasn't even started. But it is significant to note that 1 year ago on this day, we did have the historic rolling fork tornado. Now, I'm not saying at all that this is going to be another rolling fork. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that this is a similar time of year. It's not quite as potent of a setup, but it's also similar location. So I think that we could see some strong tornadoes tomorrow.
Yeah, and it kind of is ironic that 1 year ago today we had that insane outbreak, and I mean, this probably won't end up being an outbreak because it is a kind of it is looking like a pretty small area in that 10% hatch risk, but it's just ironic that it's not only on the same day pretty much, but also it's in the same area. But yeah, I mean, that was a terrible, terrible outbreak. That one we just had everything coming together. I believe we had a moderate risk for severe weather, so we not only had insane like shear and instability, but we also did have very high cape levels and dew points. But yeah, I mean, for today's outlook, we have the hatch for 10% risk area, but if this gets spread out, I think we could maybe start calling it an outbreak, depending on if this is more or less upgraded or if it's downgraded. But we can't really call it an outbreak right now, also because it's such a small area. So even if we were to see a lot of tornadoes, it wouldn't be for such a spread out area. It would probably be somewhere in and around this 10% hash risk, which is not too big. But surrounding areas of that, you're in a 5% risk for tornadoes, and then surrounding areas of that, in the green shade, you have a 2% risk for seeing tornadoes. Damage going threat, you got a 30% risk, including the same areas of that tornado threat, in the 10% tornado threat, and then surrounding areas of this 30% hail threat, you're in the 15%, with in the yellow shade, with a total population of over 7 million people, and then in the 5%, you have a total population of under 17 million people, which is crazy. But that is including the areas that are shaded in the brownish red shade. All right, and that was your damage wingdust outlook, and here's your hail outlook, and it's not bad. It's only a 5% risk for these two areas, one up in here into western Iowa, northwestern Missouri, but there's also one down here between the border of eastern Texas and western Louisiana. So really, not a big issue looking like with the hail threat as of tomorrow. But could this get upgraded? I doubt it. But it could still definitely get upgraded. It just looks like the hail threat's just not going to be the main show, not as big of a deal as what we've saw in past outbreaks. So, here it is. Tomorrow we're looking at the north side of the system. We're looking at the blizzard side. And yes, the NAM does sometimes overdo these snow totals, but I do think that with this, just um, with the severity of this system, I do think that it's good to look at the NAM, even though the NAM is notorious for overdoing these snow totals. So this is what we had going on as of 9 a.m. today. We had very heavy snow over South Dakota. We also had a nasty wintry mix over portions of northern Nebraska. But watch as the storm continues to evolve, getting later in today, and this is by 4 o'clock, and we have widespread light to moderate snowfall over portions of Minnesota, but very heavy snowfall over portions of Wisconsin. This would be very heavy wet snowfall because it's right by that warm sector, right by where you see the rainfall. And still some light to moderate snowfall out towards the Dakotas and maybe even into Montana. But for those of you that are out in this area that's on the backside of the system, you're pretty much done with it now. So um, you probably have your final amount of snow if you take this map by 4 p.m. today. But this continues, and you can see that we get more of we get more of the storm growing and more of the storm becoming more of like a wintry storm, if you would. But you can see that there's more widespread snowfall than what we have just at 4 p.m. We're already getting to 10 p.m. We have a nice band of snow that's pretty much moving over northern Nebraska into southeastern South Dakota and then into portions of Minnesota. But I mean, look at this very, very heavy snow here into north central Wisconsin. I think that could definitely accumulate to kind of pump out one of the higher totals of the day. But we can see a very, very intense freezing rain over portions of south central Nebraska. That's going to be a huge issue that we may have to deal with, and that's right by that 540 line, actually inside that warm sector. So it's interesting to see that, but that appears to be very heavy right by the northwestern Kansas border. So I would definitely watch out for that. And then getting into the rest. Whoa, what was that? I'm getting into the rest of tonight. The snow, continues. It's not. I wouldn't say it's as widespread, but still, it's snowing pretty heavily into the UP of Michigan, into Wisconsin and northern Minnesota. Still by tomorrow morning. But as the storm system kind of, it's not going to stall out, but as it slows down, I think that the ridge is going to really annoy this, and I think the snow component to the system is kind of just going to die down slowly before that moves on out. But you got more storms that are starting to move up into this region. I'm not going to say that they're going to be severe because I don't think that there is really any good chance for severe storms up here, but definitely a strong thunderstorm is possible anywhere between Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, maybe even into Iowa. All right, and then you get a lot of freezing rain and sleet on the backside, right just to the west of that low pressure center as the storm system moves out. And this takes all the way until, what is this, Tuesday? This takes all the way into Tuesday night for this entire system to move out. So a very slow moving system that's going to bring just, rounds and rounds of snow to the upper Midwest. And that's why we're going to be dealing with these crazy snowfall totals. It's because not only is it going to be really heavy, but it's going to be snowing for like over 24 hours straight for some areas. So that's pretty interesting to see. All right, so do you have anything to say on this run of the NAM for the snowy side of things, Davis?
Yeah, so not only do I think the snow is going to be very heavy, obviously, for portions of the western Midwest, kind of the central plains, but also I think that that ice threat is really going to be there. In fact, we already have some ice starting to accumulate out there in Nebraska, all right? And I think that overnight we're going to see even more and more in that pile up. And I think that driving conditions are going to be very dangerous in that area tomorrow, all right? I think that it's not going to be a fun time if you have to like drive to work or something.
Yeah.
All right, if you work from home, good for you. But some people cannot do that. So they're going to have to drive on these very dangerous roads. You've got to be extremely careful. And I think that the severe threat, just like Mr. Storm said, I think it's going to be on the lower side for Iowa. I'm not expecting that much. I think at the most we're going to see some small to moderate hail, but I think Iowa's going to get in on the heavy snowfall and ice too. So even though you're not in that severe threat really, you're going to see some significant snow along with South Dakota, Nebraska, North Dakota even.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much completely agree with what you said there. So let's take a look here at your snowfall totals. And yeah, here it is. I mean, it's a pretty big signal for over a foot of snow. I would say that this is definitely um, gotten lower. Not, I mean, we do already have some inches of snow on the ground for some of these areas, but I do think that the amount of the snowfall totals have actually gone down pretty significantly, almost by a few inches, especially up here in Minnesota and Wisconsin. Now we're down to still some areas seeing up and around 20 inches of snow. Into northwestern Wisconsin, but really everybody in Minnesota is dealing with like a 10 to 14 inch swath rather than like 18 to 22 inches. So I mean that's definitely a good thing that we're not going to see as much snow, because that's obviously going to lower the intensity of the storm system and just lower um the amount of dangerous conditions that we'll see. But still, you can see this big band of snow that we saw setting up across portions of central Nebraska into South Dakota and then Minnesota. Well, here's that signal on the NAM, and you're talking about anywhere from 10 to like 14 inches of snow. Anybody inside of this purple and in that red shade, you could expect a foot plus of snow. That's going to be for everybody inside of that winter storm warning and that blizzard warning. And then out towards the Dakotas, they're talking about really generally 2 to 4 inches, but some areas may expect over 4 inches of snow. You could see some isolated spots could see about 5, maybe even 6 inches of snow. But the main deal, the main show, is going to be over towards Minnesota and Wisconsin, where we see the heaviest snow from that system. All right, but yeah, I mean, we're definitely going to be dealing with over a foot of snow still, and maybe even close to 20 inches, but definitely not as bad as what we saw last night, and rather like 2 nights ago. But still a pretty widespread 10 to 14-inch swath of snow is looking likely here for the NAM, and then some areas obviously will see over 14 inches of snow. So that's going to wrap up that storm system. We're going to be talking about what we could expect going forward into the rest of March and then into April. It is spring. We are feeling great, but it is also severe weather season. So we've got to keep our eye out for a pattern that could support severe weather season. And also, we've got something big happening in the tropics right now. First of all, we'll talk about the Pacific. Right now, last winter we were heading into what was considered a moderate to strong El Nino, but all signs in our Enzo forecast has been leaning towards the idea that we'll go into a neutral phase and maybe even getting into a light or a weak to moderately strong La Nina, and that means with upcoming hurricane season that not only do you have record-breaking sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic, but also with a La Nina coming in. I mean, that could call for a devastating hurricane season. So I just wanted to point that out as we enter the new month. As we just continue to inch closer to hurricane season, that there still is a big potential for this to become just a very active, maybe even a hyperactive hurricane season. But let's take a look at what we've got going on the GFS. This is your storm system moving out. All right, we'll get that out of the way. And then what comes in behind it? Well, you've got a slight dip in the jet stream, so not a very quiet jet stream, pretty active here. You've got cold air that's seeping down through the north central United States with a very tall, a massive ridge up in the eastern United States. But we have also a pretty big piece of energy that's trying to get going across the western United States, but that fails to do something. We're getting a pretty big storm system to charge the Pacific Northwest. We also do have a coastal low that's moving up, bringing some rainfall on the East Coast. That's going to be looking pretty likely for your Good Friday, and then we get into the 30th. All right, and then this is your Saturday, and you actually do have a low pressure system starting to set up here across the north central United States, bring some more mountain snow and some rainfall, maybe some freezing rain, some snow up into the Great Lakes region. That's looking possible for your Easter weekend, but that doesn't really do much. We're getting to Sunday. This is Saturday night at 8 p.m. And you just have a lot of broken down pieces of energy that are trying to do something but can't. And I think it's because of this high pressure that's kind of blocking everything. And was very stable air out here in Canada. But that's not the high. That's not the highest of pressure. So that may at least try and keep things quiet. But I also do think that with that being not too strong, I think that some storms still have the potential to form. We do get a storm system by 2 p.m. Sunday to move through, maybe bring some isolated rain showers across the Northeast, maybe some backside snow up in the Great Lakes region, but I don't see anything too concerning, and we're getting pretty far out, so I don't think there's really any point to look that far into April. But yeah, I think after this one storm system, we should start to get a little bit quiet, and I think that will be good for the rest of this month. All right, so let's go wrap up the video, guys. Thank you so much for coming watch, and I'll keep you guys posted on what we see with this severe threat. We'll look at what the SBC shows by tomorrow. We'll look at what kind of reports we get today. Thank you, Davis, for joining me on the show today. That was really good to have you. And yeah, so please check out his channel. I'll put it in the pinned comment and in the description. But yeah, so stay safe, stay weather aware, don't be scared, be prepared. Make sure you subscribe to my channel, check out Davis. I'll see you guys in the next video.